had thought we were going to have moved into the new recording spot in the gym that we're putting together by now, but that room was trashed when we got the keys, and we still haven't really tackled it yet.
Life moves a little slow in 2020.
Yeah, no kidding.
Especially in Cali where you guys are.
Yeah, well, now we got fires. Everything's moving extra slow.
Yeah.
Extra slow.
Yeah, all the gyms move outside because they can't operate inside, and then now we have smoke, and you can't be outside either. So,
shit. Yeah, we're actually going to be in Laguna Beach for vacation September 7th to the 16th.
Nice.
So, fortunately, we've got an Airbnb that's right on the beach, so even if they close it down, we'll still have access to the beach.
Yeah.
Hopefully, there's still like restaurants and that sort of stuff, and we haven't even looked to see if there's any gyms that are open in the area.
Yeah, I would watch. I don't think gyms that I know of. Everything had to move outside as far as I know. And then restaurants moved outside, which is kind of cool. Like, we have good weather.
Yeah, outdoor seating's good.
Yeah, that part's good. The gym part's not as
good.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I imagine that this outdoor seating thing, expanded outdoor seating thing, is something that's going to survive the pandemic, probably.
That's my favorite thing of Austin, Texas. I feel like all their bars have like an outdoor feature, or their restaurants have an outdoor feature. And obviously California's made up for it. So yeah, maybe there's some positive coming through the
there
mess.
are probably a couple of things that are positive, and then there's a whole lot of other shit. It's just going to make life difficult for a while.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to the show. I'm glad you guys could make it today. We wanted to talk to you because we always want to talk to you, but you guys have the new podcast that just launched, and it's different than what you've done before. So if you guys want to, fill us in on that, fill the listeners in on that, that'd be awesome.
Can you take it away?
So I'm the talker out of the two of us, no surprise. Yeah, so so this podcast we've been trying to do it for over a year now. I think it's actually like close to a year and a half. And we went through several different iterations of it and eventually settled on what we have now, which is Holly and I. Originally, it was going to be myself, Holly, and then our video, what was Chino's title? Media manager, media executive, vice president of media affairs. I don't feel right calling him the camera guy because he does a hell of a lot more than that. But basically, he was going to be part of it. But we found that he really wanted to kind of like have, be a little more like Howard Sternish, which is fine. But it was kind of like when we had somebody on that was not really nutrition or exercise related, Holly was really quiet. And then if we had somebody on that was nutrition or exercise related, Chino was really quiet. And so we kind of really we were kind of trying to blend. We had a podcast that probably should be two podcasts. And so we decided that, okay, you know what, this is our wheelhouse in terms of nutrition and fitness. Let's focus on that. If we have anybody brought in, it doesn't have to be like somebody in the industry, but it should have some relationship to fitness. And that's kind of like where we're taking it. And I think the goal is, there's a lot of really good podcasts out there for science, for nutrition science and whatnot. I don't want to say a lot, but there's a few. But we're trying to add our little flair to it, be educating and entertaining, and that's kind of our goal. And that's kind of with the everybody loved the name when we dropped it, Beauty and the Geek. I'll take credit. I came up with that. So originally it was, since Chino's from Costa Rica, when we saw Chino involved in the podcast, we were like, all right, we really like Beauty and the Geek. So what do we do about Chino? Well, the joke is he always says he's Mexican because he looks Mexican, even though he's Costa Rican. So the podcast was going to be Beauty and the Geek, ... and a Mexican. But Beauty and the Geek rolls a little bit better. So that's I'd say we've kind of hit our stride now with the podcast. The first few episodes we kind of had to trudge through a little bit.
Well, I think he wanted it to be more of a live talk show. I think if you guys listen to Howard Stern or anything that's on the radio, really, it's very free-flowing, but there's a lot of structure to the behind-the-scenes stuff. And, I think we really wanted it to be like disseminating information, while still having a bit of fun. So yeah, I think we've got our groove now. Good.
Yeah, I think what's really tough is I'm a big talker and Holly is not, and I'm the kind of person, like, I don't need show notes. I'm going to go in and fly by the seat of my pants and just kind of ask what I want to ask. Kind of more, I guess, more like a Joe Rogan-ish style. I mean, when I was on his podcast, he literally rolled up and just started asking questions.
Yeah,
so maybe there was some prep time before it, but it felt very natural. But I think there's a place for that because that's how a lot of listeners would ask their questions.
Right.
And then Holly is somebody who very much, she wants everything structured out, would you say that you're a perfectionist?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that actually makes us a good team because she's going to hit those people who really like that detail oriented stuff. And then I can say, fuck, and make people laugh. So let's do it.
Yeah, a lot of thought goes into like content creating. You've created content for a long time. I mean, we've known each other for a long time now too, but I think I saw articles maybe 2010 on bodybuilding.com or something like that, like a decade, I guess now.
2002 was when I wrote my first article for bodybuilding.com.
Yeah, I was still in high school, so I didn't read much then. I was avoiding all.
I wasn't born, but that's not quite true.
Come on, babe.
But like you just basically like spoke through the process of making a podcast, and I think it's great, and you're obviously have so much to share, but everyone thinks like, yo, I'll just do a podcast or I'll just do a YouTube.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, man, it ain't that easy. We fell into it, 8 years ago, and it ended up like working. But sometimes, like you said, it just doesn't work with a format or a guest or a co-host or who knows what. There's always little hurdles you have to get around till you kind of find a flow. And it's cool that it's accessible for everyone to make one, but sadly, content creating probably isn't for all of you.
Yeah, and we started off this show with a different format, especially a different format from what we were doing before. And in an attempt to kind of, create some distance. And I stand behind that format, but the reality is that people kind of tend to like this format better where we're just talking and we take, like, when we're done, I'll figure out what our central question was. Whatever we spent the most time on, that'll be the question.
I think that's where we should start. We got to dig right into the drama, Layne. There's a lot of quacks going around and lists of quacks. And Jim,
Kevin Bass's list.
Yes.
Love to see it. Let's maybe start with so there's a list going around on Twitter of people that are more reliable sources of maybe nutrition and fitness.
And then people who are not.
And people you should maybe not listen to, labeled quacks, which I do like that term. Let's start, Layne. Is there anyone on the quack list that doesn't belong?
I actually, so people think I'm so savage. I am pretty savage, but I think Kevin's a little bit more savage than I am.
I think that's a good call. Yeah.
Because I think I think like Ted Naiman, for example, I think I probably wouldn't call him a quack. I think that he dog whistles quacks quite a bit and uses some of that same verbiage. But when push comes to shove, he will admit the limitations of his approach, which is low carbohydrate. Whereas people who are like, my true definition of a quack is if I am like literally showing you this evidence and you're just going, no. I don't believe it. I had this with kind of Paul Saladino and Sean Baker, where it's like you present evidence and they go, oh, well, that's epidemiology. We don't believe in epidemiology. And then you see them post an epidemiology study that fits their narrative. And it's like, okay, do we believe epidemiology or do we not?
Only when it's convenient.
When it supports our bias. So, that's kind of, where I, in my younger days, before I became the patient Layne you see here, I probably would have been a little bit more liberal with the quack label. But I would say that overall, I think Kevin got it really right. I had for a good example is Tim Noakes. So Tim Noakes, a professor, he did a lot of actually good research on endurance exercise, a lot of the seminal work on endurance exercise, and I think rehydration and that sort of thing. But so people unfortunately give so much leeway when somebody accomplishes something. You see this with Nobel Prize winners. Like if you go through the list of Nobel Prize winners who actually believed in complete buffoonery by the end of their lives, it's a long list. Like even the gal who discovered radiation, Marie Curie, like I think she believed in like healing crystals by the end. Like, so there's some people have asked, well, is there a thing where, you know, these people just become crazy because they're so, you know, intelligent, whatever. Linus Pauling, you know, huge doses of vitamin C recommended.
Yeah.
So anyway, Noakes did this, now is a very big proponent of the low carb diet and actually kind of dog whistles anti-vax stuff as well, and you know, right-wing stuff as well. It's funny how they like tend to line up. I've just noticed this. But in any case, he said he did like being called a zealot. So I saw that tweet where he said, I don't like being referred to as a zealot. I said, okay, Tim, answer me this. Would you ever be willing to admit that low carbohydrate is not superior to other dietary approaches? And he did not respond. And I asked it repeatedly over the course of several weeks. And actually, finally, 2 days ago, I said, okay, Tim, this is my 7th time asking you this question. And somebody goes, well, he's just probably not responding to you. I said, oh no, he's responded before. So he said, his exact words he responded with were, yes, when it isn't. So he's saying, yes, I'll admit that it's not superior when it isn't. And I said, you want to give like any nuance to that? Like, when is it not? You know, like you have to provide something. Because I can tell you, like, for example, I understand how these people get to this point, because you try and approach and you find something that works really well for you. And since you're the test subject you care about, you project that to everyone else.
Yeah. And
you think that's going to work for everyone else. And I was very much like this when I got into flexible dieting. I wouldn't say that I felt like it was the solution for everybody, but I'm like, oh yeah, this worked for me. Like this makes dieting easy for me, because for me, if you tell me, hey, you can have what you want as long as you mostly hit these macros, like I'm still going to choose pretty reasonable choices, but I found that my issues with dietary adherence completely went away when I was able to have, autonomy over my choices. Not everyone's like that. And I found that over the course of, 10 years of coaching, and I've kind of walked back some of my verbiage on flexible dieting, saying, hey, this might not be relevant for everybody. But the problem would be if I was still here in 2020 saying flexible dieting is the best way to diet for everybody. It will improve adherence for everyone, this kind of stuff, when I know that that's not true. And I think that I always tell people you should date your hypothesis, but don't make that hoe a housewife. Don't get married to your beliefs. That's the problem.
I don't see what the problem is with being able to sit in the middle somewhere too. It's like you don't have to take an extremist approach. Like there is a middle ground. Like it just seems like a lot of these people really have a hard time backing down once they've made a statement about their belief. And it's like, that's okay. Like you can change your opinion, but it's like they totally entangled themselves in their beliefs, and that's kind of what they're known for. It's like, well, how can I possibly come out of this? But they end up just making themselves look worse. So
yeah, notice we like flexible dieting, but you don't see flexible dieting in our bio, or it's not IFYM coach or anything like that. Because once you've done that, now it becomes much more difficult to walk that back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't get married to my beliefs, and people are like, oh, you never admit when you're wrong. I'm like, have you not been paying attention? Like just in the last year, I said, yeah, I don't really recommend branched chain amino acids anymore. I think they have utility. When I have 15 years of me saying, hey, I think branched chain amino acids are good to take. And people will use that against me, and they'll say, well, look, you're a hypocrite, this and that. You took money from people. You sold a BCAA supplement. Yeah. But at the time, I thought the evidence was compelling enough. I've changed my mind with recent evidence. There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a great thing, and that's what science does. And I think, like, one of the things I've noticed is people are seeing in real time now the scientific process, but because they don't understand it, it's frustrating to them.
Yeah.
So with COVID, you are seeing all these studies that are coming out, and we are overreacting to every single study. And like I tell people now, I don't get excited about single studies anymore. Let me wait until we've got a consensus of data, and then I'll worry about it, you know. But essentially, what's happening right now is we are trying to fly the plane while we're building it.
Yeah.
You know, and people are getting really like, and I'll give an example with regards to. There was a study that came out kind of showing that asymptomatic transmission may not be as common as we thought it was. And people came out and they said, well, Fauci recommended this and he said this and he did. Yes, because if you have very limited knowledge, you are going to recommend something that is going to do the least harm.
Right. Error on the side of safety.
What's that?
Error on the side of safety for sure.
Right. And then somebody else, I don't want to get too into COVID because then I'm just going to get half the people on it. Instead of 50% facts, it's going to be 50% hate. But, people said, well, he said that we should close down churches. I don't know exactly what he said. But my guess is a lot of times these people get asked leading questions.
Yeah.
And as a scientist, so for example, that may be the news headline. But what he might have actually been asked is, hey, do you think to prevent the spread of COVID, it would help if they closed down churches? And he would say yes, which is probably very true, by the way. That doesn't mean he's specifically saying, hey, go and close down all churches now, or you're a bad person for going to church. It just means, hey, as a scientist dealing in that realm, he is looking at his main priority is how do I stop as many people from getting sick as I possibly can. And so what is he going to recommend? Of course he's going to recommend stay home, don't go out, don't be around other people, that sort of thing. That doesn't mean that that's necessarily the right answer, but that's the answer he's going to give because that's his perspective. So anyways, unfortunately, people are seeing this kind of rapid kind of involvement of science right in front of their eyes, but they don't understand the process enough and don't understand that, hey, it's okay, we have conflicting results in science, this happens all the time, and the way we sort this out is through, years and years of data collection and forming a consensus and having a really good idea about things, but that's going to take time. We'll know 5-10 years from now what was the right calls and what weren't the right calls, but we're not going to know that while it's happening. Unfortunately, you've got people, especially politicians and then people in the fitness industry, who just completely attach themselves because they make their decision early and then they don't want to walk it back. But we see this isn't just to do with COVID, this is with anything nutrition, fitness related. They don't want to walk it back. And we have no problems being wrong. In fact, we would rather come out and say, if we get something wrong and we know it, we are the first people who will say it because we don't want some other asshole to call us out on it, right? Like that's the thing. So that's, even cardio. I've changed my stance on, different forms of cardio over the years. I've changed my stance on volume. I've changed my stance on accessory work, all this different stuff, because I get new evidence presented to me. So I always tell people, if you are unwilling to change your position in light of new data, you're not a scientist, you're a politician.
We even had that example recently with the squat versus hip thrust study out of South America. And we both spoke pretty openly about that on our channels. And it kind of indicated that, well, it looks like squatting is better for glute hypertrophy. So we went into depth in that, but then recently a couple of I don't know if you're familiar with Eric Trexler, Greg Knuckles, and those guys did some more in-depth analysis on the actual original data.
They did stat porn.
Yeah, a lot of stats, and it came out it's the data's probably been falsified. So we immediately come out, okay, hey, here's what's actually happened. We made a statement about this. We probably influenced a few people about their decision to squat more frequently, perhaps, but this is what happens in science. So
yeah, we came out and basically put retractions out, you know.
Yeah.
But like, why would you get married to that? Why would that be your, you know, your thing that you tie your wagon to? It's so silly. I've never understood it. I love leucine. I did an entire thesis on leucine. Turns out supplemental leucine probably isn't worth a damn. But hey, that's okay. My research, it doesn't make it, you know, because we really weren't looking at supplemental leucine, but it doesn't mean my research was wasted or anything like that. But yeah, you've got some people who just can't admit that they got something wrong. And I think a lot of it has to do with narcissism. And actually you find that too, like, I always say, like, kind of the recipe for this kind of stuff, when you go, when I start getting debates with these people now, I'll say, here's what's going to happen. You're going to straw man, you're going to false dichotomy, then you're going to ad hominem, and then you're going to appeal to conspiracy. That's going to go in that order, okay?
I think
what you have is the first thing, like, for example, if I say something like, well, in an energy balance situation or in a caloric deficit, it doesn't appear that sugar consumption impedes fat loss or has really negative effects on biomarkers based on the studies that are available to us right now. So somebody else, what I'll say that, and then what somebody will say is, you're saying people should eat sugar, or you're saying people should eat cookies, or you're promoting Pop-Tarts or junk food. No. I didn't say it was a good idea to eat that. In fact, usually what I'll say is it's probably a bad idea to eat a lot of that for, you know, XYZ, satiety, that sort of thing. But I'm also not going to make up fake claims about sugar just because I think it's a bad idea to eat it. It's kind of a Machiavellian, you know, I see vegans do this a lot too, like the crazy vegans. They have kind of a Machiavellian thinking where it's the end justifies the means. It's okay to lie about scientific research as long as it results in people eating less animal products. And we see the same thing in the low carb crazy community, which is it's okay to demonize sugar and lie about how bad it is for you as an independent risk factor if it gets people eating less sugar. And then actually I had the Australian orthopedic surgeon who got his medical license revoked.
Yeah.
Gary Fettke, I think his name is. He posted, so basically, you know, he couldn't respond to any of my science. He reposted a 3-year-old blurry picture of me with a pallet of monsters, sugar-free monsters, I'll point out, behind me, and said, see, big sugar's reach, you know, goes so far. I'm like, so a product I already used, that, by the way, has no sugar in it, that I got for free somehow disqualifies this evidence I'm bringing up. You know, so it's unfortunate that this is the way that things go, but I mean, it's the same arguments, whether it's, you know, Michael Greger from the vegan community or it's Paul Saladino from the carnivore community, although he uses a lot more scientific jargon, so it sounds better when it's from him. Which, by the way, did you see he's eating carbs now?
No.
Did you guys see this?
No, but I don't doubt it.
That wouldn't surprise me.
So,
Maybe he's changing as well.
so he's changed from carbs are the devil to now I think it's alpha-linolenic acid is the devil, is what made everybody fat and sick. Because he found he had really poor, like he was not feeling really well. Imagine that, just eating only meat, not feeling well. And he added in like 250 grams of carbs a day from honey and talked about it. But then he said, so obviously it's like, okay, part of me is like, all right, well, at least he's admitting that carbs aren't the devil now. But he's not really, because he said, I felt better from an electrolyte perspective. And I'm like, hold up. So how about all the electrolytes in honey, babe?
I know.
Oh my God.
What about all the micronutrient deficiencies that cause reduction in cognitive function and decreased concentration and immune health? Like, yeah.
So it's. I think the thing to take away is, unfortunately, you know, Greg Nuckols said something on my podcast years ago that I thought was one of the most brilliant things I've ever said. Which, by the way, anybody listening, full on, I think Greg is probably the smartest person in the fitness industry, if I'm being honest.
That's probably true.
So shout out to Greg.
Yeah.
He said, people are really good when they're talking to someone one-on-one at determining whether or not that person knows more about a subject than they do. What they are really poor at is if two people have more knowledge than they do, who is the more knowledgeable of the two? And I have found that to be very accurate. You know, if you've got two experts that are arguing and throwing around scientific jargon, who do you know who's right? Well, you're probably just going to side with the person that you like better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, or who's more jacked.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, that's a big part of it too, you know, and that's, by the way, I put up something on my Twitter the other week that really pissed off a lot of people. I'm like, okay, you guys love anecdotes so much. My anecdote is better than yours. I'm just saying, like, all you crazy low carbers, my anecdote's better. Like, I was second in the world at world championships. I set a world squat record. I've been leaner and more jacked than most of you ever have been. And I did a PhD. So, like, I'm sorry, but I've got research on my side and my anecdote's fucking better too. So how does that work?
I totally get, like, politicians and their, like, whether it be cherry picking or like really stamping their name and their identity, because you know, at the end of the day, they're marketers, right? They're marketing themselves, and that's their number one job. But in our industry, and I also understand in our industry where people are maybe creating content or they have a product and then they become that in a way. I sell knee sleeves, I'm a power lifter. I sell protein, I'm a bodybuilder, stuff like that. But this list is really interesting because a lot of it is more like science folks, you know, they're PhDs, they're the studious world, academia world, where obviously I'm a fan of you guys because you mix that world. You compete, you coach, and you have the academia, which is something I'm never going to do. Fuck school. But so I look to learn from people like you. But why is it that these people, whether it be the quack list or the non-list, so hard identify with something that might not be true, or why aren't they open to learning? Like, if you're an academic, isn't your goal just to learn? Like you already explained, right? Like, you're open to what comes next. If all of a sudden 20 studies come out and say steak's going to kill you, you might, you know, look at it different. But these people seem so driven in their way. Do you think it's a personality trait? You mentioned narcissism. Do you think it's are they trying to sell something? Are they really trying to do good? I think that's my number one issue. And obviously, sadly, in our world, not a lot of people are just trying to do good things for other humans. Like, that's why I started all this.
My theory is that people start believing their clickbait headlines. They become fans of their own brand, and they just can't come off of it because, I don't know, face, whatever, you know, like...
all those things.
So there's a lot to unpack there, Mike, and you brought up a lot of really good points. I think that, honestly, the number of people who know they are straight up lying to people and scamming them is actually small.
Yeah.
That being said, it doesn't mean that they're not scamming them. It means that they have somehow done mental gymnastics into convincing themselves that scamming is okay. What they are scamming is okay. Let me give you an example. Let's say I'm not making any claims about CBD oil. I don't think there's enough research out there to make claims either way on it. But let's say I decide, okay, I want to make some money. This seems like a good thing, and I've taken it before, and I felt something, right? So I go into selling CBD oil, right? And all these research studies start coming out showing that it doesn't do anything. Let's say that, for example, for anxiety, for example. But I'm getting all these messages from people who buy my product, say, oh, you know, I felt so much better after I took your product, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it's so easy for someone to just, because especially if you're not a scientist, you just go, well, the science hasn't caught up to it, or, you know, they must have done the studies wrong, or something like that.
Or I'm getting results from people, so.
Right, I'm getting results, so what does it matter, right? And I think one of the things that people have a really poor understanding of is just how powerful your own beliefs about something are. It is more powerful than drugs. And let me give an example to that. So actually, shout out to Greg Knuckles. He covered this on his podcast. It's where I heard it. Give credit where credit's due. There was a study where they looked at people who were naturally, I'm just going to use one, they tested a lot of things, but they looked at naturally low or high secretors of ghrelin. Are you guys familiar with ghrelin?
Yeah, our listeners may not be, but
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, it makes you hungry, basically. A hormone that makes you hungry, right? So they took these people and they randomized them into basically 4 groups. Low ghrelin told they had low ghrelin. Low ghrelin told they had high ghrelin. High ghrelin told they had low ghrelin. High ghrelin told they had high ghrelin. What they found was it did not, and they looked at like their over time, they looked at how hungry they were, that sort of thing. Also, they looked at their actual levels of the hormone. It did not matter what their genetics were. What matters was what they told them.
Oh.
And even so far as their actual levels of the hormone changed.
yeah, that's wild.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. So your beliefs are literally that powerful. And this is why we do double-blind randomized controlled trials. Because the reason you randomize is because if you allow people to select or whatever, you might get people selecting into a certain diet or trial or whatever who have similar characteristics, and that's innately why they chose that, right? So it's important to randomize because then you can assume that any difference you see in the trial is due to your treatment effect and not due to just inherent differences, which is what we see in epidemiology, right? We say, well, this is associated with, like we know, for example, processed meat is associated with cancer very strongly. But what we have less knowledge of is, okay, people who eat processed meat also don't eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. They tend to exercise less. They tend to smoke more, all that kind of stuff. And you can separate out some of those confounding variables, but it's very difficult. Whereas randomization gets rid of all that, right? The problem with randomization is you can't have a lot of people. It costs more to do the studies, all that sort of thing. And double-blind placebo is important because not only do the people not know which treatment they're getting, the researchers don't know which treatment they are giving to the individuals, which is very important because it's so easy for a researcher to bias them just by saying, oh, are you feeling better? And we're just go, oh, yeah, I'm feeling better, right? So they could just ask every single person in the group who got a treatment, if they want to prove it works, hey, do you feel better? So that's why double-blind randomized control trials are kind of the star, the gold star of research. But some things you can't do those trials on, or you can't get enough subjects to really show what you want, or you can't do it long enough. And I always tell people, I'll let you go after this. Sorry, I realize I've been going on for a while. I always tell people, if you want a large number of human subjects, it's either not going to be very long. If it's a large number of human subjects and it's well controlled, it's not going to be long. It's going to be one day, right? Mm-hmm. If you want a large number of human subjects and you want it to go for a long period of time, it's going to be very uncontrolled. If you want it to be very tightly controlled, it's going to be a low subject number. And if you want it tightly controlled and you want it for a long period of time, it is going to be animals. So, and people say, well, why didn't they do it for this period of time? Or why didn't they get more money, and money? And people have no concept of how, like, I'll give you an example, a metabolic ward trial where they have 8 subjects. People go, well, it's 8 subjects. A metabolic ward trial is where they are assessing every single piece of food people eat, the exact calorie content, macronutrient content. They're also like having their metabolic rate assessed like during the day. A lot of cases, they're collecting their stool, their urine, their sweat, like everything is controlled. You don't need a lot of subjects to get differences if you see treatment differences. And the reason that they do that is because metabolic wards are food jail. If you're there for 4 weeks, guess what? You're not leaving, right? You can't, like, I always tell people, I'm like, okay, so who's signing up for that? You're going to donate your 4 weeks where they tell you what to eat and you can't go outside? Because I'm pretty sure you're not, you know? Yeah. So it's just, people don't, and even that study would be, 6 figures easily, probably closer to $500,000 or $1 million. It's incredibly expensive, time-consuming, And people like, for example, our friend Bill Campbell, he just wants people to come in to like train, just go in and train. And like the equipment's there, the people are going to help you. And they have like a 40% dropout rate because people just don't even want to come in and like get assessed. You know what I mean? So it's very, very difficult. These research studies are very difficult to get done.
Did you have something, Holly?
No.
Okay.
Anything about placebo?
No.
So, but basically, the cognitive dissonance is real, and placebo, or the power of suggestion, is enormously powerful. And one more thing with that, there was a study a while back where they took, it was in politics, but they showed Republicans and Democrats, both groups, they showed them data that would either refute or support a position that they held. What they found was that both were equally effective at making people basically get further entrenched in their beliefs.
Yeah, of course.
So if you showed somebody something that refuted their opinion, it actually made them, it was just as powerful as confirming it.
Yeah.
It made them get that much more entrenched. So I don't know, people say, how do we fix this? I don't know you can. I think that in order to overcome cognitive bias, it's got to be, you just have to be a certain personality style that questions things, even your own biases.
Yeah, it's so interesting because like the term "be open-minded" and then like all these things are thrown around left and right. And if some, preliminary science is telling us like people just can't literally be open-minded, now we're fucked. Well, I already knew we were fucked. Now we're really fucked.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that astonishes me about people who have platforms who are doing the kind of both sidesing issues. Or like, oh well, this is a person has an appointing point of view. We're going to bring them on and have them talk about whatever, without taking the step of, is what they're talking about like lining up with any kind of science right now, or is it all just conjecture? And yeah,
do you think any of this could be solved through I know you have a couple kids, like young education. That's something like I'm really passionate about. I went to a really weird school. My mom was a teacher for 25 years. And I like to think, and obviously I haven't been through some of these political studies, but I like to think I'm open-minded. And I like to take in a lot of stuff. Like I watch a lot of like really hard-leaning left stuff on my TV, and then I'll go in my car and Rush Limbaugh's on. And then I like to make my decision through some of that world. And I don't really associate with any party, and I like to think it's some of my education. It's called Rudolf Steiner was the philosopher, and he has some quacky things in himself that are not very sciencey by any means, but his general philosophy is just try to teach you how to learn rather than teach you how to memorize in the basic terms, and it's a lot more complicated than that. Do you think there's some hope for give me some hope, friends, that maybe kids could learn how to be open-minded?
You know what, I think a lot of people kind of come into the nutrition space and they've obviously heard something from someone, whether that is in the classroom or whether it's a social media influencer. And, it kind of makes sense. There's some rationale or logic behind it. And then they'll kind of jump on that bandwagon. And I know like initially so many people kind of fell into that trap of like clean eating, like as a really good example. It's like, well, you cannot have any of these processed, highly refined, sugary foods because obviously they are causing you to, gain body fat. But then over time, I think as people do learn and become more educated about things, particularly when it comes to the topic of energy balance and kind of what goes into that. Well, now they've got more tools, they've got a better understanding, and then they can kind of they can progress their own knowledge and thoughts. So I think a lot of the initial fad diets, they probably come out of good justification. There's some reason behind it because we've seen success, but science does continue to progress. And I think depending on where you are on your learning journey, it's kind of where you're going to fall into it. And some people don't continue to want to learn. They're happy where they are and they don't want to progress their knowledge. And that's, I don't know whether that's just a behavioral thing or a characteristic of their own personality, but I think knowledge absolutely can help this, and not everyone has access to all of that. So it really does make it really challenging.
That kind of brings it. Go ahead.
I think let's say I'm king tomorrow and I'm in charge of the school systems. All right. I think one of the things I would really teach is just basic logic, right? That's not taught. Just a basic understanding of, okay, what is the way that you should approach a learning situation, right? What is actually evidence? Right down to, some people don't understand the whole, I get this all the time, right? Well, you can't prove this doesn't do that. Like, so the person makes a claim and I show evidence that their claim is false, but then they kind of double back and go, well, you can't prove that it's not this, right? And I'll say, well, I also can't prove that there's not a teacup orbiting Saturn, but I'm relatively confident that there's not a teacup orbiting Saturn. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like, but people use that as a go-to default. I think our defaults are fallacies, actually, when we get into debates. And you have to have that trained out of you. You have to have that trained out of you. Because don't get me wrong, I've wanted to straw man people and ad hominem, and sometimes I do. But, I try to really stay focused on the evidence, and and I don't, I've had some people say, well, this person, like, even if it's somebody, I mean, I've had it where I've advocated for people who I don't even like, and somebody will say, because they'll bring up something that doesn't even make sense evidence-wise. I say, okay, well, but what does the evidence say? And I think that's just really hard for people to understand just the basics of logic and how evidence works. And I agree that having an open mind is important. But if you're too open-minded, what you do is you don't even know. You would just basically have your world. If you were completely open-minded, you'd have your world turned over every time a new study came out.
Yeah.
Like, you would feel like you're on the ocean and there's 10-foot waves. They're just sloshing you one side to the other, right? So I think when it comes to being open-minded, I know this isn't an empirical formula, but I like the statement, be open-minded, but not so open-minded that your brain falls out, right? So that's why I say I don't get excited about single studies, right? Because we've just, yes, can a single study be manipulated? Yes, absolutely. And we've seen that. Does a body of evidence get manipulated? Not so much. That's why replication is the mother of all science, because how many supplement ingredients do we see that a study comes out that shows it does something and then we never hear from it again, right? What is the stuff where something like creatine, you literally have thousands of data points. We feel very confident. It's not steroids, but we feel very confident that it is an effective ergogenic aid, right? If tomorrow a study there's studies out there that showed creatine didn't do anything for a certain population in a study, right? So why do we think that creatine still does something? Well, because if we look at the consensus of the data, if we look at the overall amount of data, we see that overall it seems to definitely do something, right? But even as a scientist, I can't bring myself to say, yes, it does this.
Yeah.
I have to say, it seemingly does this. We think it does this. It appears to do this. Because I'm still leaving myself an open that it might not do that, right? Because this is just how science works. Now, am I confident? Yes, I'm pretty confident. So if a study comes out tomorrow that said, okay, we gave these people creatine, they didn't increase lean body mass, I go, okay, all right. Now, if 1,000 studies come out, and all of a sudden we've got more data showing it doesn't do this compared to it does, then I might have to rethink my position on it, right? But I think that's really looking at, like, I tell people, I was talking about this the other day, my level of evidence is, okay, first off, I go to the systematic reviews and the meta-analyses, right? What do those say? And do they agree, right? So that's like fiber, for example. Again, I hate to pick on, actually, I don't hate to pick on Saladino. When I was on the debate with him, he was like, yeah, well, those meta-analyses are great, but that's all epidemiology. And here's this one study in people who are constipated that showed that fiber made it worse. And I'm like, okay, but this isn't like, yes, I don't Epidemiology isn't my favorite thing in the world. But when it's every single systematic review and meta-analysis over hundreds of thousands, if not millions of data points, yeah, I think I'm pretty confident that fiber is good for us, But so systematic reviews, meta-analyses, then I look at, okay, what does the scientific consensus of the community say, right? Then if I'm still kind of conflicted, what do the most tightly controlled studies say? So if I don't have the meta-analyses or there's argument, okay, what do the really tightly controlled randomized controlled trials say? And then if I still don't have any kind of clarity, then I go, okay, we don't know.
And you're really going through from the theory all the way down to the operational aspect of it. What change am I going to make based on this information? And you're just sort of narrowing it down about how reliable it is to you based on your reading of it, and deciding whether or not you're going to change your diet or change your exercise or change your sleep pattern or whatever based on what you just read.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's. I always tell people, I'm like, listen, you don't have to feel attacked. Just because it says this, you don't have to do it.
Right.
I recognize that my diet is probably not the absolute best diet it could possibly be. But guess what? I'm also looking at my quality of life and how much I enjoy things. You know what I mean? If you want the best, do everything overall for your lifestyle, then you're probably never going to drink or enjoy a cigar like I like to do, or, that kind of stuff. So, I make sure my big shit is in check. You know what I mean? My list is 6 things long for me. Don't smoke, don't eat like an asshole, limit alcohol consumption, exercise regularly, get enough sleep, and try to limit your stress. And to me, based on what I've seen, that is 95% of it right there. And then if you got that stuff in check, great. But I see so many people who flip the fuck out over, small differences in dietary preferences and whatnot. Meanwhile, they sleep 4 hours and drink all the time, or use recreational drugs. And it's okay, let's. I think you got your boxes out of order there.
Yep.
So
that's what's interesting with the internet and all these, I think you even mentioned some carnivore guy now eating tubs of honey for some whatever logical reason he can make up with. What's really going on in these people's lives?
Yeah. Or
are you really eating ribeye 5 times a day? I just don't believe it. That's the truth. And how long have you actually done that? And if you honestly believe that is the best thing, and if I'm so going back to the power of the mind, if I guarantee myself that just eating ribeye all day long will make me live longer, happier, be wealthier, better looking, I'll probably do it. You have to, you know what I mean? If you're ultra convinced. But I just don't even think these people are ultra convinced. They're for sure having alcohol. They're for sure slamming some cereal.
Well, rumor, but probably fact. Someone shared with us that they were having dinner with someone who is an advocate of a particular kind of diet, and they included in this meal something that is not part of this particular diet, and was asked about it and said, hey, why are you, because that's not really part of, this plan that, and it's I bet I eat that still.
Yeah.
It's
which is fine.
It's fine, but
don't draw these lines.
Yeah, you're representing something entirely different.
Yeah, and that's the same thing with everything. How you carry yourself online should be very similar. And I can for sure put that up for Layne. Who Layne is online is very similar to who he is in person. If you just do that, you can make me happy.
Yeah.
I don't give a fuck if you're wrong, if you're a bitch, if you're dumb. Just be dumb in person and online.
That's
but I think over time, it would become difficult if you are kind of portraying something that's not going on at home. It's going to start to become really, I don't know, it would feel traumatic. I mean, I had a really similar experience recently, actually.
Yeah, but you have a conscience.
Yeah, I do have a conscience. So obviously, I'm a big advocate for flexible dieting. I was probably someone in my early years, going into nutrition school, that I felt okay, there are these, hard to define extremes, good and bad foods. And I think over time, like I obviously educated myself and I came to the understanding that, hey, I actually can have whatever I want. I've just got everything's got a number attached, and there's energy balance, and there's this thing. So I was very comfortable with that process of flexible dieting for many years. But over time, especially kind of coming out of the competition world, and I've done 5 years now of competing as a pro in fitness and figure. And kind of moving out of that, I started to see, I guess, some of the negative consequences that can result from being, incredibly lean. And I also, during that experience, I was finding like, there's so many negative physiological changes that happen, which no one talks about. And there's also a bunch of psychological negatives that no one talks about. And I was like, I don't feel very good. I've got like all this stress. I've got like this really big fixation on feeling like I need to look a certain way. There's, fixation and obsession with food, loss of strength, loss of libido, like sleep disruptions. Like there's all of these negative things. Layne's here crying. All these negative things that kind of resulted from wanting to be stage lead. And very recently, like I have been doing a lot of work myself on kind of body acceptance and being happy with having a higher body fat percentage. And as somebody that's been ultra lean, that's been a really challenging change in my life. But if I continue to just try and practice only in my own business, flexible dieting is the only thing. It's just about the numbers. That's it. And I wasn't open to the fact that, hey, you know what? Maybe from a physical perspective, like this works. But from the psychological perspective, some of the negative health outcomes, mental health outcomes from like constantly restricting, like if I just wanted to only believe that, like I feel really conflicted. And even me, I'm like emerging and changing my own strategies as a dietitian and working as a one-on-one coach to try and like open people's perspective to, hey, this is a really good thing and it can work for so many people. But hey, did you know that there's this psychological aspect of health, like your mental health, that you can also work on to feel better, to achieve that like ideal. So I think like thinking about some of these like zealots, there are a lot of people that kind of get really hooked in on that certain way of thinking. And like over time, that if you had a conscience, like even me, I couldn't just continue to practice the way that I was, knowing there are other options. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think that's because you're a genuine person. And yeah, you observe, like she even changed her name of her series that she was doing because it was Fat Loss with Carbon, which is our nutrition app. And she's like, well, I'm not really actively trying to lose fat right now, so I can't really call it that. So, I mean, that's just, but that's, if you were hard-lined into it, you would just continue perpetuating certain things, and you would just keep throwing up photo shoot images rather than being, real. And there's certainly a lot of that stuff that happens. And I actually had that experience the other day on, I don't know if you guys have been seeing this, but until recently, after I lost, came back down from the 105 kilo class, a lot of people were like, oh, how can you give diet advice? You're pudgy, you're fluffy, you're fat. I'm like, hello, body dysmorphic fitness industry. So I'm actually not fat. I'm actually in a really good body fat, especially if you want to be fucking strong. And I didn't just forget how to diet. I can promise you, this is part of a plan, and I will be lean again, Well,
and even going deeper into that, like it's always best, I think, to lead by example and live the life you coach, but you could have all the knowledge and be the best coach in the world and probably not live the best lifestyle, in my personal opinion. And you see that in every sport ever. The best baseball player was not the best coach.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, what Holly was getting at was kind of a whole person approach too, where you can't just wall off that part of your body, or your mind, not thinking about like what your mental, emotional health versus just how lean you look in the mirror, and then chasing that ideal that you may or may not ever achieve, and nobody can sustain over the long haul, right? I mean, it's
most people can't.
It's essentially you're reaching a peak, and then you can't stay on the mountain. You've got to come down and like breathe normal air like regular people. some of the time.
One of the things that you really saw was that, because it's the difference when your partner is telling you this versus when you discover it on your own. I think a lot of people, when they change their mind, it has to be on their own. Like, I think very few people actually change their mind when somebody's telling them something. It comes from self-reflection. And so I would, she would, for example, look at some of these different girls who were seemingly lean all year round. And I'm like, babe, they don't have sex. They feel like shit. They're probably an asshole, and they probably never go out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I always tell people, you might be able to have the physique you want, but it ain't going to be with the lifestyle you want. Because what looks great feels like shit.
Yeah.
Okay? There's probably a few exceptions to that. There are some people who can probably maintain a really lean physique because their genetics matter. But for most of us mortals,
especially drug-free.
Yeah, especially if you're drug-free. And I think you finally kind of came to that. You saw a lot of these girls were like, okay, well, let's look at their lifestyle. They live alone. They don't have a partner. They have no kids. Wonder why that is.
Yeah, there's got to be some kind of sacrifice along that way.
Right, but I'm not judging a lifestyle, right? Like if somebody decides, hey, I just really like being lean. That's the most important thing to me. Hey, it ain't my jam, but hey, whatever. I know what it felt like to be that lean. It ain't fun. I'd rather lift some heavy shit and be pretty lean and look good at the beach rather than being, dick skin shredded and not actually be able to use my dick. I couldn't help it. That's like somebody messaged us, they were talking about fit couples, and they were like, or I forget what it was, but somebody's talking about fit couples and kind of had this idea that they're having sex all the time and all this, and we're like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
They never touch each other,
Looks good for the photo, though.
Looks good for photos, yeah, exactly. It looks good on magazine covers where the girl's grabbing the really muscular guy. In reality, they're both just thinking about food.
Yeah. I think to add to that, I know I've been speaking about it a lot lately because it's definitely prevalent in my life and the people that I work with. But going back to that extremist mindset, there's also there's the fitness community and there's this diet community, but then there's also this anti-diet, hard,
yes.
Really attacking, and it's if you have the desire even to change your body, there's something wrong with you. It's very critical. So I've listened to a lot of this stuff, and some of the points that they make are really genuine. I've really listened to some of these bigger bodied individuals, and they're I'm truly happy. Yes, I have a bigger body, but generally we're looking at biomarkers that are a reflective measure of your health. They have nothing wrong. Their lipids are good. Their cholesterol is low. They've got, their, any of the measures that we can look at to assess your general health, they're great. And they're living in a great body. It's I don't see the need to change my body. And I'm not sitting here as somebody that's in the diet community going, well, you should change.
Right.
That's not what it's about. But I think it's really cool that for some of these people that maybe have struggled with changing their weight in the past, I think there are nuanced, scientifically proven things that we can do nowadays, which is awesome, that might actually make it a lot easier. And I think even just the term of the new method of thinking around the reverse dieting concept and knowing that there is metabolic adaptation and that we can actually coax our metabolism back to a really good place. One, if you can be patient and have the willpower to do that, maybe you can make some improvements. And I guess a lot of these concepts haven't been known, and they haven't been around for a very long time. So I think people have just kind of launched themselves off the deep end. And it's well, that's never going to happen, so I'm not even going to bother trying. And again, that's such an extremist approach. But there is somewhere in the middle that you can find balance.
But you can see the commonality thread. That's a great example of the health at every size community haze. Is that the concept originally was, okay, even if you are overweight or obese, there's no reason you can't practice healthy habits and be healthy at that size. And I think there's some validity to that there is evidence that, for example, you don't need to lose very much weight in order to have a big impact on your health. And you can be obese and your health markers still be healthy. So I think there's some validity to that. But so this is an example of, you're somebody who identifies with that and you like that. Okay. But then that's not enough. It's not enough for that to be it. What the next step is, well, diets don't work. Calorie deficits don't work. Nobody should diet. And if you diet, there's something wrong with you. So it goes all the way from a good idea, low carb, for example, right? So I think I had like the clown meme where it gets more and more, It's like, I like eating low carbohydrate as a way to control my appetite and hunger. Next one down. Eating low carbohydrate is a way for me to control my calories. Next one down. Insulin makes you fat in a calorie deficit. Last one. Carbs are fattening nobody. So it's like a lot of these movements, if you're not careful, and I'll give you one instance where I almost got kind of into cognitive dissonance. So I like to shoot handguns, rifles. I love tactical shooting. It's one of my favorite things in the world. It's one of the only things where I like zone out and actually just enjoy it. And I believe in the Second Amendment. So that's kind of my bias coming from that background. I'm sure I just lost and alienated 50% of the listeners, which is great. So I was a member of the NRA for a while, and I found myself starting to gravitate towards an echo chamber where because I agreed with one thing or a couple things, I was more willing to be accepting of all things, right? And eventually I checked myself and I'm like, wait a minute, what the fuck am I talking about? I don't believe this. You know what I mean? So I actually, I still am a believer in the Second Amendment, all that kind of stuff. And, I still enjoy tactical shooting, but I acknowledge, points that people make on the other side. Okay, I get it. That's a downside. All right. Here's what I think the upsides are to it. And hey, if you don't like it, that's fine. But it's almost like where, in that community, just like any other community, guns aren't, increasing the risk of homicide. In fact, if you have more guns, it actually makes everything safer, And I'm like, I don't know if I actually believe that, and I think, what happens is you'll get alienated by the echo chamber if you acknowledge anything from the other side.
Right?
And again, I don't want to get too much into politics, but, for whatever reason, you see this happen in politics, like Donald Trump, for whatever reason, hitched his wagon to hydroxychloroquine. Right? Yeah. Which, if you look at the research data, if you are otherwise healthy and young and they give it to you early enough, it appears like it might help things a little bit. But in one of the studies, it actually increased mortality, and it certainly doesn't seem like a cure, right? Yeah. Now, there may be some people who benefit more from it than others because everybody has differential responses to drugs and whatnot, but it certainly doesn't seem like a cure at best. It seems like it may have mild benefits for people who get it early enough, right? But it's like, well, like you said, we can't walk it back now, right? And then the entire party, the entire echo chamber has to get behind that. By the way, for anybody listening, I align more closely with Republican values than I do with Democratic values. So I just call out bullshit where I see it. So I apologize in advance. Actually, no, I don't apologize. Take that back. But you see this, people who get sucked into echo chambers, and it becomes not only is what I like the best thing, everything else is the worst thing, right? Not only is low carb better for you, LDL, you actually want it higher. You don't want low LDL because it's associated with decreased cancer or increased cancer. You want high LDL. You want to push that LDL up. And they ignore the body of research that shows, well, LDL is causative for cardiovascular disease, pretty clear. And the research on cancer actually shows that LDL drops in response to the development of that illness, not that LDL causes cancer, because when you looked at Mendelian randomization studies, I'm going to talk about this today. So Mendelian randomization studies look at people who secrete naturally more or less of, certain hormones or metabolites, that sort of thing. And it's nice because it's basically a lifelong randomized control trial. Because the variants, the gene variants, don't affect other biomarkers. So when they look at these, they don't, people who secrete low cholesterol versus high cholesterol, there's really no difference in cancer risk. And in fact, there's actually a small increased cancer risk with high HDL and with high LDL. So so you just don't see that, but they ignore that body of research because it's not enough to say, well, low carb seems to be good for this, but it's probably not the best thing for this. No, it has to be, it's the best thing for everything. And anything that shows it might not be the best thing, well, it's actually wrong, the science is wrong, and the government's involved in the conspiracy, and it just goes down the rabbit hole.
It seems to be getting worse, and maybe it's just because of the internet and the popularity, and obviously more extreme things kind of are happening on a global level. But is there any way besides self-awareness to get around this? Like you said, you start digging in some NRA stuff, and maybe you're like, all right, fuck it, I'm all NRA. You got the NRA tattoo I saw, and then all of a sudden you're like, I don't know if I believe everything.
Don't tread on me.
And then maybe you're like, well, I don't believe this necessarily. Besides self-awareness, and you as a person, I don't want to overly judge you, but it seems like you're always searching, and you're always searching for the truth. So for you to come across some NRA stuff and be like, that's actually not what I believe, doesn't surprise me at all. But how does the average person do that?
I think the average person
just doesn't.
Well,
we're fucked.
At least a segment of society does the cult of personality thing. They're like, I identify with this person for whatever reason, and I'm going to buy hook, line, and sinker everything they sell me.
And then there's no fix. We're fucked.
Yeah.
I've even had people say, when you say something, Layne, I know you're 100% legit. I don't even question. I'm like, God damn it, no, God damn it, no. Yeah. You have not been paying attention. We have our own biases. Anybody who says they don't have bias is full of shit. But we try to be honest about those biases and state them up front, and I think that's the difference.
Yeah, we'll just present the alternatives. I think people really think that we are kind of anti-keto, anti-intermittent fasting. But no, that's not the case. If someone came to us and was like, okay, well, I really want to practice this, well, then you're just going to present them with all the options and say, well, here's what we know about this. Here's what we know about this. You can now make that decision since you now have that knowledge. But I think as a community, we generally want to feel like we're a part of something.
Yes.
And
tribalism.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably where that all stems from.
It's us versus them, that, but that's a lot of it. We didn't even touch on the tribalistic factor of it, of echo chambers. It's just, I think social media makes it a little bit worse because your feed is curated to you. So you start to think everyone thinks like that, and then when you're exposed to people who don't think that way, you have a visceral reaction because you're like, how the fuck could anybody think this way, But yeah, I don't know how to fix it. I guess what I would,
teach emotional intelligence, is that?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think there's, narcissism exists on varying levels, and unfortunately, when you're a cult of personality, right? You're being told how great you are all the time in that echo chamber. And if you're not leaving it, you start to buy into that, right? Fortunately, I am the tip of the spear in terms of calling out bullshit. So I basically get told how shit I am all the time. So I don't usually have that problem of thinking my shit doesn't stink. But yeah, it's very difficult to get around that because as you said, Mike, or was it Jim? I forget who said it, but you identify with a certain personality, and then you just buy into them. It's like growing up, for example, I had my favorite baseball player, my favorite basketball player. If you had told me something negative about them, I would not have believed it, right? But look at these athletes who get arrested, for example, or celebrities who get arrested, and 90% of society makes up their mind immediately whether or not they're guilty or innocent, right?
Yeah.
Without any facts.
I'm over here can I wait to give my opinion? When this whole, George Floyd thing went down, people were like, well, aren't you going to make a statement? I'm like, I don't know what the fuck happened, man. I'm not down with racism. Fuck that. But I don't know if the cop was racist. I'm not in his mind. Maybe he just fucked up and made a really, really fucking poor choice. I don't know. You know what I mean? But if you say something like that, which I'll probably get shit for saying it now, But if you say something like that, you're just going to get fucking destroyed. You know what I mean? So it's really unfortunate that we've gotten to a place where it's like you got to make snap judgments, and it's one side or the other, and there is no in between. You know, I'm like, you realize like it's impossible to say that, or it's possible to say that like low carb diet can work for people who a low fat diet didn't work for, but it also might not be the very best thing for cardiovascular disease. But hey, if it helps you lose weight and keep it off, it's probably better than not being able to do it at all.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's some nuance in that. And it's just in any social issue, any kind of issue whatsoever, it's so hard to get any kind of nuance out of people.
Well, that's what brings us back to Kevin Bass's list. A bunch of people in that Twitter thread are saying, well, I lost, X number of pounds following one of those quacks, whatever. It's like, okay, well, here's the thing. For once in your life, you applied discipline to your diet.
Yeah.
Somebody's discipline, somebody's theory, you applied it with vigor in your life, and you lost weight. That's great. That's awesome.
Well, it's kind of a straw man argument, right? Like you're what we're saying there. So this is where there's what you say and there's what somebody hears, and those are two different things.
Yeah.
So if I say, well, a low carb diet isn't magic. It doesn't raise your resting metabolic rate. It's not metabolically superior to a calorie protein equated high carb, low fat diet. What people hear is low carb diet doesn't work. That's what Layne said. It can't work. Well, I lost 50 pounds. Well, I bet you did. That's great. That's fabulous. Fuck yeah. But just because you lost 50 pounds doesn't mean I'm going to stand up here and accept somebody talking bullshit about the fact that insulin makes you store fat in a calorie deficit. Like, I'm sorry, I'm just not down with it. I'm just, no matter what it is. I mean, I even stood up for the ketogenic diet at a conference years ago. Dom D'Agostino and I were on a panel, and somebody's like, well, we know the ketogenic diet impairs endurance performance. And at the time, we didn't know that. Now there's actually some research that seems to suggest that it does have a slight impairment of certain endurance performance. But I said, well, I don't think that's necessarily true. We don't really, the data is pretty equivocal right now. So there I was, standing up for a diet that I supposedly hate, and I'm like, if you've even been paying attention, the problem is people listen to their own echo chamber, right? So what I say, the way it's framed in an echo chamber is going to be, Layne says low carb doesn't work, that, all your experiences are lies, all this kind of stuff. And so people don't actually bother to read what I've written and, debate that. And then when I kind of, corner them with logic, they either lash out with ad hominems, conspiracy theories, or they just don't say anything anymore at all.
Yeah, that tends to be how it goes. You were mentioning your Carbon Diet app earlier. Give us the elevator pitch on that.
Sorry, that again.
Carbon Diet Coach. What's the? Give me your 60-second pitch on it.
Oh wow. Okay, so it is it has an algorithm behind it. It was written by myself, Layne, and Keith Craker. It essentially coaches you for fat loss. It can coach you for reverse dieting, so to help restore your metabolism. It can also coach you to build muscle. It has a built-in coaching section where every week you would check in like you would with a regular coach, as in one-on-one. It responds to your individual body changes. It's not cookie cutter. There's nothing, ordered about it. It is purely responding to your body changes and makes adjustments to your nutrition if you need it. It also has a really cool built-in tracking component that has some awesome features that allow you to practice calorie cycling if you like. It gives people options to work within their preferences for their diet. So it has options if you are a ketogenic fan, you're really a big advocate of, say, veganist diet, vegetarian, there's balanced options, there's low carb, high fat options. So it really caters to the individual's dietary needs in order to help you achieve results. So
basically, we tried to take our coaching and package it into an app. So we said, all right, if we were when we were creating this algorithm of, people sign up for it and then they'll do they'll do like an initial calculation or something like that, and they'll go, oh, well, that seems a little bit off, and then they'll think that's all the app is. No, just like if I was a coach and you came to me and said, I want to lose weight, okay, I'm going to take your information in. I'm going to give you an initial plan, but if you aren't responding appropriately to that plan, I'm going to adjust that plan, which is exactly what the app does. So the real value in the app is not, that it gives you a macro calculation. You go to find plenty of free websites that'll do that. One, they weren't made by us, and I'd like to think our coaching pedigree is pretty high. But also the adjustments, the fact that it's going to learn you over time, right down to on the back end and even displaying to you. The app is calculating your total daily energy expenditure based on the amount of calories you consume versus how your weight changes, and then averaging that over multiple weeks to flush out any kind of like wild variations, because that's what's going to happen, because as you know, your weight fluctuates. Right. But over the course of weeks and months of tracking this, it's going to like really nail down your total daily energy expenditure. And that's why people say, well, do I need to account for my exercise? No, because the app inherently is going to do that based on the way your body weight responds. And at every level of writing the algorithm for this application, we ran test cases and said, okay, not only was this the right adjustment, would we have done this as coaches? Like, so if we did something and it came up in a way that the logic was not something we would have done as coaches, we went, okay, we need to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to make this work. So, as far as the quick pitch, we have 15,000 members in less than 3 months, and our app rating is 4.8 stars on the App Store. So nice. If anybody's ever produced an app, you know how hard it is to get good ratings. And I think anybody would be, for $9.99 a month, it's hard to beat customized nutrition coaching that goes on this guy right here. And we do have a food tracker as part of it, but the food tracker is, by the way, a lot of people have said, wow, this food tracker is way better than MyFitnessPal. But the coaching component is what really makes it work. So we're very proud of that. That is, many years in the making, and people are loving it right now, which is really cool.
Awesome. Well, you guys have been very generous with your time. Where can people find you both?
Mm-hmm. I am on many platforms. I think YouTube and Instagram are my biggest,
Don't message her on Facebook. She won't get back to you.
So my both handles are Holly T. Baxter. I didn't really talk much today because my husband is a talkaholic, but I think that's probably the most popular spots. We have a page which has all of our educational books and our material, and access to the app. So that is www.biolayne.com/IG. So you can get our books on reverse dieting, fat loss, contest prep, and then any of our other, stuff.
Yeah, I'm BioLayne on most every platform, and I do talk a lot, but my lovely wife, she's the color commentator of our duo, and she, did you guys ever see Major League?
Yes.
Movie? Do you remember Major League 2, where Bob Uecker passes out and Monty has to take over?
Yes.
And Monty, there's a screaming line drive, and the guy dives and catches it, and he says, "Fly ball, caught." That's you, babe.
Yeah,
I'm just kidding.
No hype zone.
Business for nothing, folks. No, I think it's, actually what I love about our podcast is that, just the difference in personality actually really makes it fun. And the fact that people are going to get to know us over time and know that, okay, Holly only talks when she's really excited about something. Otherwise, she just lets Layne ramble on until she inserts some kind of fact that makes Layne kind of stumble over his words and go, oh shit, I hadn't really thought about that. So I think it's definitely, people who are listening, you're going to love our podcast, Beauty and the Geek. If you're looking for me specifically, don't go to me, go to her, Holly T. Baxter. She got way more good stuff than me. But if you still want to go find my stuff, if you don't hate me after listening to me talk about guns and Trump on here, then you can find me at BioLayne on all the platforms. And as far as the stuff we sell, Carbon Diet Coach, I cannot recommend it highly enough. You can find it on iOS and Android. So if you just search Carbon Diet Coach, or if you want to go to our website, it's joincarbon.com. Our educational books you can find at biolanestore.com. I do have 2 courses right now called The Science of Nutrition and Training the Physique Athlete that both have nothing but 5-star reviews on Google. And that's with Clean Health Fitness Institute. So you can find those courses on cleanhealth.com.edu.au. They're an Australian company that helped me put them together, and they're freaking awesome. So people for a long time have asked, hey, how can I learn from you if I can't make it to a seminar? Learn at your own pace from home on any device. It's awesome. They did an amazing job with this course. And then we do have a supplement company that's going to be coming out soon called Outward Nutrition. So we're not really busy. We just
Casual.
all the time and sleep. But Outward Nutrition, our motto is we're not magic. This stuff only works if you do, but we're going to give you some products that allow you to train harder, recover better, hopefully build some more muscle and strength in the process.
Awesome. I can just say that the second episode of Beauty and the Geek comes out tomorrow, Thursday, and every other week, right? That's the frequency we decided on, right? Every other week?
Yeah, it's bi-weekly, yeah.
Excellent.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in. 50% Facts every single Wednesday. I'm Silent Mike, wherever you want to find me.
I am at the Jim McDonald on all the social medias. This show is 50% facts, where percent is a word, 50 is just numbers, and the website's the same. And we'll talk to you next week.